Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Climate and Water Update webinar for autumn 2019. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. And for anyone who's joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Today we'll be discussing recent climate conditions over summer, also the autumn 2019 outlook for temperature, rainfall and stream flow. My name is Caroline Andrzejewski and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Claire is our producer and will help moderate your questions. Hi Claire, how are you?
I'm well, how are you, Caroline?
I'm great, thanks. Please send them through via the chat function and we will address as many as we can. Before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off on some housekeeping items. Our broadcast today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Please note the chat box where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters. Please send your questions to us during the session and we'll answer as many as possible during the allotted breaks. And finally, I am delighted to introduce to you our presenters, Robin Jewell and Catherine Genter. Hi Robin, hi Catherine.
Hi Caroline.
Robin and Catherine both work in the long-range forecasting team at the Bureau. Their experience lies particularly in seasonal outlooks and climate. Collectively, they have 20 years of experience in climate. Robin has a strong interest in helping people to understand complex science, finding new ways to interpret and make climate science understandable, usable and accessible to all Australians, just like our webinar. She has also worked as a weather forecaster for the Bureau in Darwin and for the UK Met Office in England. Catherine's main focus is reporting on and communicating the current state of the main climate drivers for Australia, as well as the monthly and seasonal rainfall and temperature outlooks. We also have Fatima Mechanic in the room with us to help, who is our stream flow expert and can answer your stream flow questions either via the chat function or we'll ask them throughout the webinar. Thanks for helping us out today, Fatima. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Great. Welcome all. We're looking forward to hearing from you today. Catherine, you're kicking us off. Would you like to tell us what you'll be covering in this webinar?
Sure. So today we'll talk to you about the recent summer conditions, which will help set the scene. And then we'll take a look at the outlooks for rainfall, temperature and stream flow, and how these are likely to affect significant weather. We'll then round it off with the major climate influences on these outlooks. So first up, let's take a look at the recent conditions. We've got here the summer rainfall deciles, and that middle coloured red is bottom 10% of summer rainfall records, with that deeper red lowest on record. And then on the flip side, that middle blue colour is the top 10% of records. And these are of course compared to our 119-year rainfall record. So summer 2018-19 was Australia's driest summer since 82-83 and 7th driest in the 119 years. With the poor wet season across large parts of the Northern Territory had its 4th driest December to February and WA its 5th. Darwin also had a very late monsoon onset. In fact, it was actually its 2nd latest on record. It was also particularly dry over southeast Queensland in January and February. On the flip side, Northern Queensland and Northwest Victoria had heavy falls during summer. For Northwest Victoria, this was during December and they experienced flooding. For Northern Queensland, Cape York had tropical cyclone Owen and Penny cross the coast at some point in December to early January, but it was heavy falls slightly further south in late January to early February that experienced the notable widespread flooding. So let's take a closer look at that heavy rainfall. I've got here on the right the rainfall for the 13 days ending the 7th of February, and you can see two areas of very heavy rainfall. One's near Townsville in that pinky area, and they had above 1.2 metres of rainfall in that 13 days. And another further inland in Western Queensland in the darker blues area of over 600 mils. So this event saw an active monsoon trough across the region and a slow-moving tropical low that sat near the base of Cape York. So that's where that western blob of rainfall is. And this setup produced extremely heavy rainfall. In fact, more than 2 metres of rainfall near Townsville. So just visualise that, 2 metres of rainfall dumped on the landscape. So let's now focus a little on the dry areas. So this is our rainfall deficiencies map, which highlights areas in the bottom 10% of rainfall records from April last year to February this year. Beyond those smaller, wetter areas we just talked about, it was actually pretty dry elsewhere in summer. A drier than average northern wet season increased the spread of rainfall deficiencies across northern parts of the country, such as along Western Australia and in parts of the Northern Territory. And we also saw the dry spreading or intensifying in southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales and parts of the southeast. The other thing to bear in mind is that the record warm summer has also intensified the effect of the low rainfall on the landscape by evaporating any moisture quickly. And how is our soil moisture looking? So much of the country has had below average soil moisture for summer. It's really only areas in the vicinity of the flooding that have had above average soil moisture. So this means that the landscape overall is relatively dry. So these conditions feed into our water storage levels. So the areas in the east, in the purple there, we have the Murray-Darling Basin, the east coast of New South Wales and southeast coast of Victoria. They all have decreasing water storages over the past year. Those vertical lines in the graphs there are 6 monthly time slices. So the northeast coast and Carpentaria coast, on the other hand, in the blue there, they have spikes in their water storages from the recent rainfall. Unfortunately, little of that flooding rain is likely to get into the Murray-Darling Basin. Most is making its way through those two basins, and some of it has made its way into the Lake Eyre Basin to be sucked up by the landscape. So before I get to the temperature section, it's poll time. And the first poll today is how warm were the days this summer where you live?
All right, so we've got some options there. This will just give everyone a chance to think of some questions about recent conditions while you answer the poll. Was the summer near you close to average, warmer than average, warmest on record, cooler than average, or coldest on record? And I think the idea behind this, if I'm right, guys, is to get a bit of a sense of what the perception was out there of our audience of the summer just passed before we tell you how warm it was. But while everyone's answering that, can I ask you a quick question, Catherine?
Sure.
Do you think all that rain, so you mentioned some of the rain in Queensland is going into the Lake Eyre Basin, but for those of us who don't know exactly where that is that going to help with any of those rainfall deficiencies in the other parts of Queensland?
So unfortunately, it was quite a focused area where this heavy flooding rain was. Mm-hmm. So it's unlikely to affect, sorry, I've just seen a question, where do I answer the poll?
Officially, the poll should have popped up on your screen if everything's working. We've got about 200 participants online and we've had not quite 60 odd people answer it so far. These webinars are a bit tricky, they're a bit device specific, so hopefully you can see something in front of you. If you can't see the poll, how about you let us know in the chat function what your answer is.
So just to finish answering the question, because the rainfall is quite focused in that one area, we unfortunately still have quite a few areas that are missing a lot of rainfall.
Okay.
Thank you. Ian Peters just told us that the poll comes up in a pop-up window. So maybe that's how it looks on your screen. Thank you.
Yeah.
How's the poll going? Have we had a lot of people filling it in?
We have had about 150 people fill it in and we've got about 50 people to go.
Look.
Nick tells us that he checked the climate stats for Wagga Wagga, right?
Oh.
So he might have a leg up on what to answer for this poll.
I'm guessing a lot of our audience is actually going to have a fair understanding of what they have been experiencing, but it'll be interesting to see. Maybe if we close the poll,
do that and share the results.
Share the results and have a look at what everyone said. So we have no pop-up window for one person, but they choose B, warmer than average but not record-breaking. What do you guys expect to see?
I feel like it's been very hot.
So do I.
And I already know the answer, so I'm finding this one hard to answer. But it does depend on your location. So we'll probably have a range of answers depending on where in Australia you are. And Catherine shows you in a minute, there has been a little bit of variability across the country.
Yeah. So the results are in, and we've got most people saying warmer than average, and another big chunk saying warmest on record. Catherine, tell us if that, and some close to average, and some cooler than average. Be interesting to know where they're from. Tell us what it was like.
Sure. So what we have here is our summer daytime temperature deciles, and the darkest orange there shows where daytime temperatures were highest on record, and that's across quite a large part of the country. And the other two mid-coloured oranges are showing above average temperatures and white and near average. And I would think if you're close to Perth, if you said below average, you might be close to being correct.
Scott told us Southwest WA was cooler than the rest, and he nailed it because it's just in that white zone near the coast.
I think people are pretty good at knowing what it's been in their location.
Yeah.
I think people would have done this one really well.
So it was the hottest summer on record by some way for Australia, and actually it was so clear we were able to say this before the end of the month, which is really unusual. Most states were hottest on record too, except Tasmania and Queensland, which were 4th and equal 7th respectively. So all states were well in the top 10 of their 109-year record. And the highest temperature for summer was at Port Augusta in South Australia with 49.5 on the 24th of January. Now, I hope this cursor works for most of you, but Port Augusta is actually pretty close to being coastal, so it's sort of not in the usual sites that you would expect. So if we take a look at minimum temperatures for summer, it was also our warmest summer nights on record too. 3 states also had their warmest nights on record: New South Wales, Victoria and the Northern Territory, with the remainder either 3rd or 4th warmest. So it was very warm set of nights. Although you can see southwest WA closer to normal. The highest minimum temperature on record also occurred this year at a place called Wenaring, Barona Downs, in New South Wales, and they had 36.6 on the 26th of January.
That's hot for a minimum.
Yeah.
And that's an all-time World Australia record.
Yeah. So part of the reason things were so hot is that we had several periods of widespread extreme heat, and some of this was tied up in the delayed monsoon arrival, which brings widespread cloud and cooler conditions to northern Australia. So we had three peak phases of the heat, with December and January taking the brunt of these. January in particular was especially hot, breaking the previous national monthly record in Australia by almost 1 degree. So this was our hottest month of the year, breaking its previous record by 1 degree. We literally had hundreds of records broken, so it's really difficult to choose what's special. And the special climate statement to date is about 60 pages long, detailing records. This plot here on the right, I think, summarises it relatively well. It shows daily records from stations with over 40 years of data, which broke either their monthly or annual records. So you can see it really is quite a widespread event or events. And as you might expect, our fire indices were also above average for summer. The yellowy orange colours here show above average forest fire danger index values. And unfortunately, this has led to many bushfires across the country. Summer, for example, began with unprecedented fires across the Queensland East Coast, some of them in rainforest areas. So I haven't been specific with the areas there, but you might recall in the last webinar we saw it along quite a long stretch of the coast. We also saw major fires across New South Wales and southwest WA, and Melbourne's largest water storage, the Thomson Dam, was also threatened at one point. And we can't forget about Tasmania. It's had over 200,000 hectares burnt, and 88,000 hectares were in the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. And into early March, we've also got the Bunyip fires just to the east of Melbourne. Unfortunately, I couldn't find, but there's a number of photos out there of the weather that the Bunyip fire produced, but I couldn't quite find a good example of it. Smoke from the fires and dust raised from the parched interior of Australia also saw periods of reduced air quality over eastern Australia. And I'm sure many of you listening will have been affected at some point this summer. So, to summarise, we saw our hottest summer on record. It was generally dry with the exception of northern Queensland, where the heavy rainfall and flooding occurred. There was quite a bit of significant weather around too, and I've put this satellite picture on because on the 12th of February you could see three pieces of significant weather on the satellite. So firstly, in the blue up the top there, you can see the floodwaters in the north in the blue circles. So there's the fresh brownie coloured water and silt heading out to sea. The red circle shows bushfire smoke plumes in New South Wales, and the yellow circle shows dust
Before we go on, Fatima or Catherine, we had a comment from Terry saying excellent floods in the Diamantina and Georgina. So I'm just wondering if that's your left blue circle.
I think it's slightly further south.
Okay.
But that's probably where some of the water came from.
Thanks, Terry. Close to 1974 levels in upper parts of the Georgina, but declining levels as it moves down the system.
And I think that was in relation to, is that going to help the areas with rain deficiency? He was saying that it's probably not going to reach further south.
So it's important to remember that all these factors mean that we're heading into autumn with an already stressed landscape from the low rainfall and the exceptional heat waves.
All right, thanks, Catherine. That is a lot of significant weather and dry weather and lots to take in for us coming into autumn. We'll move on to the outlook very shortly, but before we do that, we've got another poll while you can send in some more questions. What weather-dependent decisions will you be making this autumn? So this is partly for us to get a sense of what information is most useful to you, particularly in these webinars, but with our climate outlook and all Bureau information in general. So what type of crop to plant, rostering of staff for emergency response, whether or not to purchase feed or other. So you can put other into the chat function. We can't actually answer what type of crop for you, but hopefully we can provide the information you need to make those significant decisions. So let us know.
And look for your poll in your pop-up window if it hasn't appeared.
Poll in the pop-up window. And while those are coming in, if we haven't got any questions in yet through the chat function.
We, just going back to that hot summer that was for most of Australia, certainly we've got a few friends online from Western Australia. Thanks for coming on in. And yes, they're all, they had a cool summer as our map showed, which is, you're the envy of the rest of Australia because we had a hot. We also had a comment from our friend in Wagga, who's Nick, who said, I checked the climate stats a couple of weeks ago. On average, we're supposed to have 1.5 days above 40 in January. This year we had 12.
Yeah, these heat waves were exceptional, partly because of duration. So there were lots of locations which had many more days above 40 than they would normally have, in fact, record-breaking numbers of days. There was one location in Queensland which had 60 consecutive days above 40 degrees. So intensity, duration and the spatial extent, that was all remarkable about the heat waves that we had this summer.
We're getting lots of others coming in, which are very interesting. Bushfire control activity, review weather conditions to support credit finance decisions moving forward, advising northern beef producers of feed availability, making decisions on water availability. We had a couple early on that said activities, reporting seasonal conditions outlook and drought monitoring for LLS and growers to make recommendations, supply and demand considerations for agriculture. I think I saw before we had a whether to plant crops and whether to buy feed and what crops to plant, weather and climate information for growers in the cropping season of WA. So first rains of the growing season are very important. This is for sowing decisions. So we've got lots of people making a lot of very important decisions. Cyclone and heavy rainfall affect commodity export from Queensland or New South Wales, and feed supply and forward availability, looking to determine what stock and domestic drought water points we establish for the community. So a lot of very tricky decisions to be made. We might close the poll now and have a look at the spread of answers, but Robin, after we talk through the results, do you think you can answer all those questions?
Well, that's a lot of questions, but I think that we're going to be able to help with a lot of those questions. I feel like though we're going to have a big spike on other for this one.
Yeah, I think so.
It's not surprising when we look at the list of people attending. There's a great range of people from different sectors, so I'm not surprised that there are lots and lots of different types of decisions.
Yep. So yeah, we do have the biggest chunk is other, so and we heard a range of those. Rostering for staff, emergency services, 24 out of 200, that's a lot. And whether or not to buy feed or type of crop, it's got some answers too. So let's move on to our outlook, shall we, and hope we can answer some of their questions.
Okay, let's get started on answering some of these questions. So I thought I would start with rainfall. So we ran our climate model last week, and it was issued last week. And the big, large map here shows our chance of exceeding median rainfall this autumn. So I think immediately everyone's eyes are drawn towards the really large area of oranges and yellows. This unfortunately means for most of northern and eastern Australia, it's looking very likely that it's going to be a drier than usual autumn this year. But when we go further west from the Eyre Peninsula and across into Western Australia, we aren't seeing a strong emphasis either way there. This doesn't mean that you will get average rainfall, but we're not seeing a strong bias here towards it being dry and wet for that matter. So if rainfall is what you're after, it's a better outlook in Western Australia certainly than it is in the east. And I'll draw your attention now to the little green map. So this little green map is showing the accuracy of our model at this time of year. And I thought I'd talk a little bit more about how we measure the accuracy of our model, as it's a really common question that we get. How can we know that we can use your model with confidence? How do you test your model? So our current model has only been in operation since August last year, which is not that long. So it's only had a few real-time forecasts. But what we did before we put our model operational was we did a very rigorous test of the model. We went back to the 90s and we told our model that it was this time in 1990. We put all of the current observations into the model for 1990. And then we let that model forecast for autumn 1990, and then we compared the forecast to what actually happened in autumn 1990. And we did this again for 1991, 92. We did this for more than 20 years. And we did this for every starting point of the model. We issue it twice a month. So twice a month in every month of the year. So the green map shows where historically over that period we tested the model did a really good job at picking the outcome. When it predicted a high chance it would be drier than usual, most of the time it was, or wetter than usual, most of the time it was wetter than usual. So if you find your location on the green map and your location is green, you can use our model with confidence. On the flip side, if you're in the white area, we would advise using the model with a little bit of caution because it hasn't performed well in your location at this time of the year. So we always recommend that you look at the skill maps on our website in conjunction with looking at our forecast, and the skill changes with location at all times of the year, so you have to check it every time. There's some links at the bottom which give you some more detail because we do a lot of different ways of measuring the skill of our model, not just these green maps, and you can check the scientific papers and go into a lot of detail there. I also put a link down the bottom which talks about how we make our climate outlooks, because some people may find that interesting, and if we get time we can talk about that in a bit more detail today. But let's talk about the actual outlook in a bit more detail now. What I showed you a minute ago was the outlook for the whole of autumn, averaged across the autumn, but we can actually give you a bit more resolution in what might happen in particular months during autumn. So on the left we've got the outlook for March, and in the middle the outlook for April, and then the autumn one again there for reference. And we can see that there's a really strong emphasis in March for dry conditions, and again somewhat in April, but it is looking like a lot of this dry signal is coming from the first part of autumn. So autumn's a transitional month in Australia. It's when the northern wet season starts to transition to the dry season, and in the south we're looking at the start of the southern growing season. So this may mean in the north that we'll see a drier end to the northern wet season, but it could also mean in the southeast that we may see a later start to the southern growing season. I also thought I'd take this opportunity to talk a little bit more about some other products that we have available on our website that not everybody often knows about. Some people say, okay, it's nice that you're telling us that there's an increased chance it'll be drier than average, but I want to know how much drier than average it will be. And so we do find that often people will have a threshold that's really important to them. It might be, I need to get 25 millimetres in March, for example, and that's how much I need to know whether I'm going to maybe plant a certain type of crop. So we do provide a service on our website where you can pick the threshold that is important to you, and we can give you the probability of that amount of rainfall occurring in the coming month or season. Alternatively, sometimes people will say things like, when you say there's a 60% chance it's going to be dry, that's not enough confidence for me to change my decision making. I need to be more sure before I'm going to maybe buy more feed. I need to be more like a 70% chance or an 80% chance sure. So we can also give you the ability to select the probability that you're comfortable with, or to investigate what amounts you have a good probability of getting, or a poor probability of getting. So you can select the probability that you're comfortable with and find out how much rainfall you're likely to exceed with that probability as well. And I put a little example there, a screenshot of our website in Western Australia, and this is the actual forecast for March. There's a little bar graph in the pop-up, so you can click on your location, and if you hover over that, it'll tell you the actual amounts. But we can see there that there's a 60% chance you'll exceed 10 millimetres. That's not a really high chance, it is more likely than not, and that's only for 10 millimetres. There's a less than 20% chance that you'll see 25 millimetres, so it's not likely that you'll see 25 millimetres, and there's a less than 10% chance you'll see 50 millimetres. And our model does not think it's physically possible under the current state of conditions that you'll see 100 millimetres. So you can dig around if you have time on this website, and you can get a lot more information than just chance of exceeding median, and I've put the link there for you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Is that cumulative total for that month?
Yeah, so it's the average. Yes, it is. So if you're looking at March, that's the total for March.
You can look at that,
Yeah, or you can look across the season, but most people like to know in smaller time increments, so the monthly one becomes a little bit more important there usually. But you can look at the season totals as well. So for stream flows, we can see that after Catherine was explaining how dry our soils are, it's no surprise that for large parts of southern Australia we have a high chance of seeing low flows. In the north, it should be noted that in the north, because of the time the stream flow outlook was issued, it's not well representing yet all that rainfall we saw in early February in Queensland, but the forecast will be updated on Tuesday. So if you're in the north, check in on Tuesday for a more up-to-date outlook for stream flows in the north. And again, we do show our past accuracy maps for you to have a look at as well. And we'll see, you can see here that in the south, our stream flow model has very high skill, quite high skill, moderate to high skill at this time of the year. So you can use our forecast with confidence there. So turning to temperature. Now I'm showing here the minimum temperature and maximum temperature, chance of exceeding median, and this is a very emphatic forecast. All of the map, most of the map is in that bright red colour, which is right at the top of the scale. That's more than 80% chance that autumn will be warmer than average, which is a very high likelihood that we're going to see a warmer autumn.
It's probably not that surprising given what the summer brought for us.
Yeah, our outlook for summer looked very similar. Unfortunately, for many months now, every time we've issued our outlook, we've had a lot of red on our temperature maps. And yeah, as Catherine explained, we had very high temperatures this summer. What does this mean for significant weather? It means that we have an increased chance of heat waves in autumn. Now, I know that heat waves in Australia, especially in the south, are usually focused around summer. But we do have heat waves in autumn sometimes. Last year in the south, in April, we had midsummer-like temperatures for several weeks in April last year. So we do still need to be on the lookout for heat waves this year. And again, with a warm and dry outlook in the east, it does look like our bushfire season will last longer this year than it has perhaps in other years. This risk is going to remain really now until we get our first lot of really good autumn rainfall in the south. We also have an increased chance of drought in those areas which are already under a lot of strain, which is most of large parts of eastern Australia and parts of southern Australia, including southwest Western Australia. So some locations have had a very extended period of dry conditions in the east. It's been a couple of years, reaching back to several years in parts of Queensland. But we do have a lower chance of, we do see a high chance that we'll see a lower number of tropical cyclones this year, that's definitely a good thing if you live near the coast. But when we see less tropical cyclones than usual, it can be an indication that we'll see less of that big soaking rain inland that you often. So our tropical cyclones are a bit of a double-edged sword. They're terribly dangerous if you live near the coast, but once they reach land and they weaken, that's often the remnants of a tropical cyclone is often how we get our replenishing rainfall to the landscape in northern Australia.
Thanks, Robin. Now, before we go to drivers, we've got a few questions about drivers, so they'll be answered next. Yep. But we've got some others that have come in, if I can ask a few. Does dry autumn have any correlation as to whether or not we could expect late frost activity for southern Queensland, northern New South Wales?
So when you have, so once we get in, at the start of autumn, obviously it's still, we're seeing it's likely to be warmer than average, but as we get towards the end of autumn, when we see an indication that we'll see less rainfall than usual, that means we'll see clearer skies at night time, and that can increase the risk of frost, yes.
Right, thanks. We have another question that actually I think came in a bit earlier, but what caused the unusually strong winds in the southeast Queensland? Our listener is near Stanthorpe this summer. This had a huge effect on exacerbating drought conditions, so I think that was part of the recent conditions. Do we know what caused those winds?
Well, we've had a lot of, it's possibly, actually I'm just trying to think about locations-wise and make a synoptic map in my head. We had a lot of a lot of high-pressure systems to the east of Australia, so we call them blocking high-pressure systems that stay there for many days. And when you have that, you can have an increase in the amount of wind that you get from the northwest or the north of the north. So when that happens, and as Catherine mentioned, we had this late onset of the monsoon, especially over the Pilbara and the Kimberley. So the Pilbara and the Kimberley, the sun's practically overhead at this time of the year. And so when you don't have the monsoon, it just heats up and heats up and heats and heats and heats and heats and heats. And if the monsoon doesn't come in to cool things down, that heat just gets swept way over Australia when we have weather systems that bring those northerlies and northwesterlies. And then you've got the wind also causing more evaporation of the moisture in the soil as well. So it's a bit of a compounding effect. So yeah, we definitely had a synoptic situation which was very unfavourable if we were after heat waves.
Thanks. I've got another question here from Tim. It's actually a comparison with the Japanese Agency for Marine and Earth Science forecast for March and May rainfall. So you may not be able to answer it right now, but he's saying that their outlook's a bit different. Any thoughts on what might be the cause of the discrepancy, or will we need to take that on notice?
It's hard for me to answer without having a look at the outlook. I did have a little bit of a glance before I came in at what other international models were forecasting. So I had a bit of a look at the US and the UK and the European model, and they were all showing, they're never going to be exactly the same, but they were all showing a very similar pattern in that large parts of Australia are likely to be drier than usual. Maybe you can always send your query, and we'll have an email address that we'll put up at the end, and we can look at that particular question in more detail and answer it for you, so I can actually see the forecast in front of me to answer that question for you. But it's normal that there is variation between the outlooks. It's because the models are all set up slightly differently. It's in situations where all the models are forecasting the same thing, it increases your confidence in the outlook, and most models are forecasting similar.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have a situation where the models are all quite different, and that's often a situation where there's a bit more uncertainty.
Great. We have one more question just about the sort of how the forecast is made. They're asking, why are we using 30 years of data if our records go back further? Would more data give more accuracy in the outlook? Or?
Yeah, so this is probably related to when I was talking about how we test the model.
Yes.
Why we just tested from 1990. That's because to start a dynamic computer model, you need to have a very good picture of the current state. So you can't just do that from ground stations because it's a global model. So we really, computer models really came into play when we had satellite information where we could get an indication of the current temperature everywhere across the globe. So it wasn't until the 80s that we had satellite coverage. So. And we generally try and pick a large 20 to 30 year period because we want to make sure our model has an opportunity to see how well it captures things like El Nino and La Nina, which can vary significantly across a 10 to 30 year time scale.
Thanks. And the other benefit is that if it's a recent period, we can also, people have a lot better feel for what the recent history is like compared to the full record.
Yeah,
great.
Stuck in our minds a little bit more.
Yeah. Thanks. We've got some other questions, but a lot of them are actually about drivers. So let's move on with our climate drivers. And if they're not answered through that bit, we can ask some more driver questions. The question is always why.
It is, yeah.
Tell us about why.
Definitely. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what's been influencing our outlook. So we're keeping a really close eye on the Pacific Ocean at the moment. We're looking out for El Nino. So some people online are probably going to know a lot about El Nino, but others maybe not so much. So I always start with a little picture that just explains what El Nino is. Roughly during El Nino, what we see is an increase in warmth across the equator from South America into the Central Pacific. And where we have really warm ocean, the air above it gets warm and it starts to rise, and then we see lots of rainfall and cloudiness develop. And often when air comes up, well, not often, always when air comes up in the atmosphere, it must come down somewhere. So what we see generally is air subsiding over Australia in this situation. We have more high pressure and fine weather and less rainfall. So El Ninos usually start in autumn and end in autumn and end by the following autumn and peak towards the end of the year. So last year we almost had an El Nino. We had a very El Nino looking ocean, but we didn't really see any sign that the atmosphere, we didn't see large scale atmospheric changes and that atmospheric pattern developed. But if we look at what's happening right now in the Pacific Ocean, and I've put some little icons here so we can know where to look, we still have a lot of residual warmth from that near El Nino we had last year. So this means that there is potential this year for the ocean to continue to warm over autumn and potential for us to go into El Nino. So there's a particular part of the ocean that we monitor really closely as climatologists. And so if we look here, we can see on the left a forecast, the Bureau's model forecast for what will happen to the temperature of the ocean in this box. And it's forecast to warm. Our model is predicting that that bit of ocean there is going to warm and reach El Nino thresholds this autumn. But we don't just look at our model because modelling El Nino is very complex So modelling temperature can be a lot easier and rainfall a little bit harder again, but something as complex as El Nino is very difficult to model. So to increase our sample size of what's plausible and possible, we look at what other models are forecasting too. So the graph on the right demonstrates what other models, so we've got a Canadian model, European model, that Japanese model that was mentioned earlier is there as well, American, French, UK model, and we can see from this graph that about half the models are forecasting will reach El Nino levels. So that's enough warmth that usually drives that change in circulation, but half of the models are falling short of that. So because of this, we're sitting at a watch status at this point in time. So that means that we have about a 50% chance of going in El Nino. So about half the time when we have conditions like we do now and model outlooks that we see now, we do go into El Nino, but half the time we haven't when we've seen this situation before. For autumn, El Nino conditions in autumn, that's when El Nino just starts to develop, but there is an influence. That map here shows areas which are yellow and pink show where we typically see less rainfall than usual if we get El Nino in autumn. But some of you may be looking at that and thinking, this is not exactly how our outlook looks. That's because our outlook is generated by a computer model which factors in a lot more than just El Nino, and we're not even sure yet whether we will go into El Nino, which is some of the reasons for the difference between the composite and what our model is forecasting. We're also looking at the Indian Ocean very closely at the moment as well. I put a little icon here to show that we've had a very warm area in the Indian Ocean for a very long time now. And often, as I said before, when you get warm ocean, you get warming of the air and rising of the air and more clouds and rain over that area. And that air has to come down somewhere. It has to subside somewhere. And so it appears that we've had a lot of subsidence, probably partially driven by this warmth as well, not just the warmth in the Pacific Ocean, driving subsidence over Australia and high pressure in the Tasman and Coral Sea, which has been driving our stable, clear, fine conditions. I've shown here actual forecast of mean sea level pressure from our model. So usually we just show you the actual temperature and rainfall outlooks, but this is the forecast of mean sea level pressure. So where it's green, our model indicates, so this is for autumn, where it's green, our model indicates pressure will be lower than usual, and where it's pink, higher than usual. And we can see that very typical El Nino-like low pressure, where that warm ocean is driving the air to rise and pressure to lower there. And we can see those highs over Australia, which is very El Nino-like. But we can also see that low pressure in the Indian Ocean persisting through autumn, and also the subsidence from that is in this region as well. So we've got this double effect. We've got heat in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean looking to drive higher pressure over the east of Australia, and that's what's influencing our outlook this autumn. So I think this is probably another good spot to stop for any more questions.
Yep, and we've got quite a lot coming in. Just a reminder to send them through the chat function if you can, rather than the Q&A. But we've got one from John, who said he recently read an article about an unseasonal typhoon. The point is, NOAA has already called an El Nino. Is there a discrepancy to what the thresholds are for them to fall to ours, or?
Yeah, so that's very astute to notice that. Someone with a global view, it's good. America use different thresholds than we use. So they have a lower ocean threshold. They have a 0.5 degree of warming threshold, and we have a 0.8 degree threshold. So every country, every Met Office in their country will choose a threshold which has relevance to the weather in their country, and when they usually see impacts kick in for their country. So the US are using a model which is tuned to them, and we're using a model which is very much tuned to us and when we usually see those thresholds. So there is a difference there. But our model is definitely tuned for Australia and our impacts.
I just saw there was a question about whether if we don't get El Nino, what's the next best, or what's the next most likely state?
Oh, that's a good question. So we're looking at now at falling into the two categories, which is either El Nino or neutral. It's because of the warmth we have at this time of the year, El Nino is really a very much an outside chance. We're really going to fall between those other two categories.
Thanks. We also have a question from Chris. Why did the outlook change so dramatically in the last update? For instance, the previous outlook was drier in WA and wetter in the East Coast. What weather pattern change drove this change?
It's a bit like our 7-day weather forecast. We'll forecast out 7 days ahead, but as we get closer to that day, we get that lead time closes, and we get a little bit more information, which allows us to improve our forecast as we get closer to the date. So our first issue was in the middle of the month, but in the 2 weeks between the end of the month, 2 weeks is a fair bit of time. And at this time of the year, this is when it's a time of the year of it's a transitional season in the Pacific as well, not just in Australia. So it's when you can start to see things start to rapidly change and then swing towards either El Nino or La Nina. So we had quite a bit of warming over that 2 weeks, which means now our model's picked up on that, and our model is now increased the emphasis on those dry conditions.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. We have a bit of a question about model performance, which is a bit, we were talking about it before. How did the new model predict the recent above average temperatures and duration of above average temperatures during January 2019? So did our model predict what we saw last?
Yeah, we had, going into summer, our model was showing an extremely high chance that we'd have a warm summer, so it picked it very well. Our model forecasts the chance of exceeding median. It doesn't forecast the chance of heat waves, but when you do have a really high chance that it will be higher than average at that time of the year, you can infer that that increases the risk of heat waves.
Yeah. Thanks. So we did quite well on that one.
Yeah, and you can go back on it. When you go to the website, the Climate Outlook's website, you can, I put the past, there's a button where you can click for the archive. So you can actually go back and check yourselves, and you can see what we forecast going into summer, and you can have a look at the map if you want to. It's very available.
Thanks. This is also about the heat. It seemed to be quite dominant. How unusual is it that so many temperature records were broken at the same time? Is that
unprecedented?
Unprecedented. All right. There we go. One word answer for that one. Never before.
Over 100 years.
Record.
Yeah. That's a long record.
It is very unusual. So, and another question from Scott, IOD positive for autumn. So I think you talked a bit about the Indian Ocean dipole. That's what IOD is.
So at this time of the year, it's very difficult to forecast the Indian Ocean dipole. We don't have a lot of skill looking very far ahead. It's very difficult to see more than a month or two ahead with confidence. Our model is a lot better at forecasting El Nino. More skillful is the IOD. But as we get closer, as we get into autumn and into winter, then the model gets much better at it. But the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean work together. So these drivers are not completely independent. They all influence each other. And there's quite a strong correlation between positive IODs occurring with El Nino. So if you do get an El Nino, you are more likely to see a positive Indian Ocean dipole event as well, but not guaranteed. So we're keeping a very close eye on that. At the moment, when you look at the mean sea level pressure map that I showed before, that very warm water further south is clearly a very strong driver in our model at the moment rather than IOD, but we'll be keeping a really close eye on that.
Yeah, so there's another question about IOD, which I might just jump down to, which is what drives the Indian Ocean low. Is that what you're saying, or is that too complicated to answer now?
It's actually a research question at the moment. It's quite unusual. So it's been there for a long time, and we've been experiencing drought for a long time in Eastern Australia. And there's a few attribution. The Bureau doesn't necessarily do these attribution studies, but there are other groups and organisations out there that are taking close looks at what has been the cause of the specific causes and drivers in detail for the recent dry and drought and also heat. And so that's something that is a research question that people are looking at the moment.
We're getting a lot of questions in. We will take as many as we can now, but we might need to wrap up soon. There's a quick one. Why do you use median rather than mean? Or is it a quick one?
No, it's when you in the north, in northern Australia, you can have a dry season where you virtually get no rainfall, except for occasionally you'll get a shower or two. So if you do mean, it'll pick up those occasional bits of weather that you get occasionally, and your mean will show some rainfall. Median represents what happens a lot better in northern Australia because the median will be 0, and that's what you normally experience in the dry season. So median for rainfall can be a more useful way of thinking about rainfall.
Thanks. Looking forward to next summer. So this may or may not even be on your radar yet. Any thoughts on how this might look based on the autumn, winter? Too far ahead?
It's too far ahead. Okay. But having said that, so our Bureau model forecasts out to 3 months. And we don't know yet whether we'll get El Nino or not. But if we do get El Nino, then you can get a little bit more vision a bit further ahead using what we know about the characteristics of El Nino. So during El Nino, I think I mentioned earlier, they usually begin in autumn and build through the year and peak at the end of the year. And so in the peak of an El Nino, you typically do see drier and warmer conditions over eastern Australia. So if we did go into El Nino, that would increase the chances of a drier and warmer summer. But we don't know yet if we're going to get El Nino. And at the moment, our model is forecasting out to 3 months.
It's a long way ahead, isn't it, Robin? We're just going to take the last question from Peter. Any other questions, we will show you the email if you want to send them in. Peter's asking about what the wrap-up to the very dry, wet season might be. Do you have any ideas?
It does look likely that it will be a drier than usual end to the wet season. We've still got a couple of months to go, and the monsoon is notoriously difficult to forecast. So a drier than usual end in northern Queensland may be welcomed. I think they've had their replenishing rainfall. But for other areas, people will probably be on the lookout and will be hoping that they'll get some more good rainfall. We'll just have to wait and see. But the odds are not in favour of it being particularly, the odds are in favour of it being a dry end.
Oh, thanks, Robin. Now, we've run out of time for questions, but we'll show you an email address to send them in after the webinar, and we can answer them then. So if you would like to summarise for us.
Okay, so I've just got one summary slide here. So as we've talked about a lot already, it looks like it's very likely to be warmer than average with an increased chance of heat waves, below average rainfall in the north and east. This means an increased chance of bushfires this autumn and in the south, a bushfire season lasting perhaps longer than in other years, and an increased chance of drought, especially in the east there, but a lower number of tropical cyclones, as we mentioned. I've put here for more information a bunch of links, and there's also been links put in through the presentation as well. We have, as those of you will probably know, we have an enormous website with lots of information on it.
It's enormous.
So we've tried to make it a bit easier and point you to some spots that will be helpful. Also, we welcome you to engage with us on social media. We have a hashtag there, BOM webinar, that you can use if you want to talk about today and have a conversation with us. We'd love you to do that. And importantly, we've got our email address here because we've had many more questions than we've been able to get to today. I'm sorry, but please send them through to this email address here so that we can answer some of those for you. And you can subscribe as well to e-alerts through a link here. So if you want to get some of our our climate outlooks are issued twice a month, our ENSO outlooks once a fortnight. You don't need to go and check in your calendars when it's going to come out. We can send you an e-alert to let you know when they're issued, if you like.
Thanks, Robin. We had a comment from Philip saying, thanks, next summer, not what they want to hear. And I think it's probably not the best news for everyone, but hopefully there's some information here for everyone that has been helpful.
It's too early to tell about next summer.
True.
It's a 50-50 chance of El Nino. So we just need to keep a really close eye on how that develops as we get closer to summer.
Yeah. So our next webinar, if you want to come to another one, for the outlook is the winter, Thursday the 6th of June, so don't forget to register for that. Before then, we're also having a webinar which showcases some of the Bureau's urban water information. So if anyone's interested in water in cities, feel free to sign up for that. And that brings us to the end of our webinar today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Robin, Catherine and Fatima, for your time in developing the content and sharing your wisdom. To our audience, thanks for tuning in and joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session and we do hope you'll join us again next time. As I mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded and we will have the video ready for you your on-demand viewing pleasure in the next few days, so watch this space. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It is our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. Once we close this webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen and we'd be very grateful if you could complete it for us. Once again, thank you for your time and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.